All right, would you bow with me as we have our prayer before we begin singing? Lord, we thank you for this opportunity we have tonight to come together. We thank you for all the many blessings we have in this country and the things that we sometimes don't take time to appreciate. We're thankful for all those. We're mindful of all those that are mentioned tonight on this sick list. Pray that you would be with all those, and we pray that you be with their families, and pray that healing might occur so that they could be back here in their place to worship with us again if it be in accordance with your will. We thank you for this church. Thank you for the leadership here. Thank you for everyone who serves in the capacity that they do and the things that they do in order to reach out to spread the word to all those around us and around the world. We thank you for Jesus and for the great blessing we have of knowing him and the great sacrifice that he's made on our behalf. And we thank you for that, and we pray that as we come together tonight to study your word, that you'll help the teachers and help us as we have time to look to your word and to grow from our time and study together, so that we might be better examples and we might live closer to the example that Christ set for us. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
I'd like to make note of the song of invitation. After Colin gives us the lesson this evening, it's number 903, There's Power in the Blood. We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4 on both songs tonight. We'll go ahead and start with number 650, Send the Light. We'll sing verses 1, 2, and 4, and then Colin will come up and give us our devotional lesson for the night. 1, 2, and 4. There's a call comes ringing o'er the restless waves. Send the light, send the light. There are souls to rescue, there are souls to save. Send the light, send the light, send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. The blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. We have heard the Macedonian call today. Send the light, send the light. And the golden firing at the cross we lay. Send the light, send the light. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forever to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. Let us not grow weary in the work of love. Send the light, send the light. Let us gather jewels for a crown above. Send the light, send the light, send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. Tom?
Tonight, before we go to class, let's think a little bit about what inspires us in our daily lives. Inspiration plays a role through every day that we live, whether it be someone who inspires us or something such as a tight deadline or anything else. It requires you to get something done. We all had to be inspired to get here, inspired to get up in the morning. But we need to ask ourselves, what is our central inspiration in life? A lot of things can happen when we put Christ at the center of our inspiration. We can grow fruits without even realizing it. Not only does having Christ as the center inspiration in your life help you spread the gospel to others around you, but it also helps you live a much more fulfilled life. We read in Romans chapter 15, verse 13, "Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." From this we see what we are continually told throughout the Bible, that God will take care of us. However, while we may not notice this effect of putting Christ as our central inspiration in life, due to our busy lifestyles that we go through every day, we just may think we have a good day, but others will notice in our interactions with them that we have a much greater purpose whenever we go through a bad day and something doesn't go our way, and we still continue to live a fulfilled life. Also, whenever we put Christ at our center, we have a much more directed life. We can look at Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, which reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths." This tells us how when we lean on Christ and put him at the center of our lives, we will have a much more directed life as we make decisions throughout our days and actions on a daily basis. So tonight, before we go to class, if you feel that Christ is not at the center of your life and you want to put him at the center of your life, you can come forward as we stand and sing.
Power in the blood, would you or evil a victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you be free from your passion and pride? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Come for a cleansing to Calvary's side. There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Would you do service for Jesus your King? There's power in the blood, power in the blood. Would you live daily his praises to sing? There's wonderful power in the blood. There is power, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. There is power, wonder-working power in the precious blood of the Lamb. Now dismissed to classes.
Chapter 2 is where we'll be as we get going. If you recall, what we're doing each week is we're looking at the book of Proverbs in a topical way. This is lesson 4. If you go back to lesson 1, we looked at it as far as a unit or in a holistic way. And what you see in the book of Proverbs is a discussion of a man telling his son what lady you want to marry or what lady you want to choose and be with. And, you can imagine a father sitting with his teenage son or sitting with a younger son, and they're sitting there on the couch because that's what malls have for men, right? You have the couch there. Mostly men sleep on the couch. But imagine in this one, the men are sitting there. And you have a father saying, yes, you want a girl like this, but you don't want a girl like this, and kind of going through. And so what you see in the book of Proverbs is a lady of wisdom, a lady of folly, and a lady of virtue. And as they walk along, you'll notice chapter 2 and chapter 4 and chapter 6 will discuss one, chapter 3, chapter 5, and chapter 7 will discuss one. And in chapter 9, they all stop in the same place, and he really goes pretty quick between all of them. But that's the way in which you cover it holistically. What we're doing each week is we're looking at it from a thematic way. What we've done is we have broken apart the book, and we're going to look at different verses that actually specifically have to do with certain things. And so tonight we're going to look at general relationships. We're going to look at how you treat the poor, how you treat your enemy, what wisdom and foolishness is as we go through that. And I think that's the main parts that we're covering, as a matter of fact. Now, I hope I've got my font a little bit closer. Yeah, you can see it a little better. The only problem there is it says chapter 1. And let me look it up real quick, because I think that's chapter... Is that chapter 1? Or is chapter 2? Let me go back to where I need to be. There you go. Chapter 1, verse 10. Let me grab a Bible. I think that should say chapter 2. Unless my Bible in my head is playing with me, which wouldn't be the first time. Verse 10. It is chapter 1?
Verse 10.
Chapter 1, verse 10. Well, it's right. Good. All right. Very nice. All right. So as we get started, you see right here, chapter 1, verse 10, and what we're going to talk about in these first 2 or 3 slides is who you choose as your friend. There's a guy who does professional advice or blogging, I guess you would say. And thousands and thousands of people, millions and millions of people, I guess is a better way to say it, follow him. Seth Godin. You ever heard of that dude? Who? Seth Godin. He does a lot of tweets. He's the guy that I originally heard this from, but I've heard it from many other sources as well. You are the sum of your 4 closest friends. And so think of the 4 people that are closest to you, that you spend the most time with and that influence you the most. And you are the sum of all those people. Now, if you're like me, you think, man, I'm independent. I'm not like those people because I hang out with weird people. Not y'all, just outside of church. But think about that. Other people influence us greatly. And so you're influenced by your parents. You're influenced by your siblings. You're influenced by the people you work with. You're influenced by the people you're in school with. You're influenced by the people you fish with, that you hunt with, or whatever else it may be. And so it's very important for us as we get started tonight to talk about who we choose as our friends. And so let's run through here. We'll start in verse 10, and actually we're going to go for a little bit and just read because it comes in sections as we're getting started here. He says, verse 10, "My son, if sinners entice you or lure you," other translations will say, "do not consent. If they say to you, 'Come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol,'" or the grave, "and whole like those who go down into the pit." Look at verse 13. "We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us, and we shall all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain a net is spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood, and they lurk secretly for their own lives." Now, maybe you can remember back in high school. Maybe for some of us, that's a little bit longer back than it is for others. But you remember back in high school, you saw a lot of people, and actually everybody was more or less equal, right? You came from pretty similar backgrounds. Some people made really good decisions in school. Some people made not the best decisions in school. Now, you make one or two bad decisions, it's not going to really affect your life. But when people start making one bad decision after another, and you're around a crowd of people who make bad decisions, do those eventually add up? We look around and you see people who are from very regular, good, wealthy, if you might say, homes, who end up living in their later lives in poverty because of decisions that they made. And then you see people from very humble backgrounds who, because of the work in which they do and because of the things that they do, they end up being pretty well off as life continues along. Now that's looking at it from an economic standpoint. But spiritually, we could say the same thing as well. You see people, if they miss one Sunday out of a year, it's not going to affect them very much, is it? But what happens when you start missing several Sundays, or you start missing Sunday night and Wednesday night, and you get to the point where you're not around God's people very often? It accumulates, doesn't it? Because your relationships begin developing and growing, and you begin learning from other people. And so that's what he's talking about here in chapter 1. You're going to run across people in life who seem to be able to game the system. Maybe if you're a teenager, they're able to go out and drink on Saturday night, and they're able to serve on the Lord's table on Sunday morning, and nobody knows the difference. Maybe if they're adults, they live a certain way, and they cuss at the factory, or they cuss out at the plant. They're heathen as can be, but they come home, they're with their family, and nobody knows the difference. And you think, man, they've got the system gamed. They know what they're doing. But the decisions we make eventually catch up with us. I used to have a saying back when I was a youth minister. Scary stuff. That's 20 years ago. But back when I did the youth ministry work, it was 17 years ago, my saying that I always did, every class started with D to the third power, D3. Decisions determine destiny. And pretty much every class started that way. And it was true spiritually. It's true talking about just regular decisions that we make. Decisions will determine your destiny. So that's what he's getting after here in chapter 1. Now in chapter 2, once again we go back to verse 10. That's the reason why I was confused there. We're looking in chapter 1, verse 10. Looking over in chapter 2, verse 10, notice what he says here. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you. Understanding will keep you, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things, from those who lead the paths of righteousness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perversity of the wicked, whose ways are crooked and who are devious in their paths, to deliver you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters you with her words, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house leads down to death, and her paths to the dead. None who go to her return, nor do they regain the paths of life. So you may walk in a way of goodness and keep to the paths of righteousness. All right, in your own words, what's he saying there? How would you sum that up? Huh? You wallow with the pigs, you're going to get dirty. Very good point. Very good point. Okay? What I catch from that, and maybe I'm reading more into it, is the people that we desire to associate with are a reflection of who we consider ourselves to be. The people that we want to be with oftentimes are a reflection of who we consider ourselves to be. When we don't have a high self-esteem, and I think sometimes maybe we overemphasize self-esteem, but when we don't have a positive self-identity, sometimes we'll tend to want to be around people who are lower. And then it leads and makes us grow into a system of going lower and lower and lower. And I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes we choose difficult people to have relationships with, is because of our self-identity, which we have. Now, that's true maybe in marriage, true in dating, but I think it's also true in the group that you hang out with at school or even at work. And what he's saying here as we look through it is use discretion. Use discretion with who you share yourself with. be very careful about who you spend time around. Now, you've got a little bit of a difference here, right? Because we look at Luke chapter 15, and we see Jesus as we're looking at those three parables. Remember, parable of the lost sheep, lost coin, and lost sons. We see it starts out because the Pharisees are upset because who Jesus is around. Now, who is he spending time with in Luke 15? The sinners, prostitutes, tax collectors, and outright sinners. So was Jesus not using discretion here? Well, he is using discretion, but what was he doing? He was teaching. He was in that environment in order to teach the gospel. Now, you and I, we need to be able to relate to sinners. We need to be able to talk to people who are lost in this world and show them the love of God. But is that what this passage is talking about? Not really. What's this passage talking about if it's not that we need to be teaching the lost? What would you say? I'm making folks. Yeah, have discretion. Verse 11, stay away from people who are going to lead you into sin. You got to save yourself. Very true, very true. I've used the illustration before. I had a teenager ask me one day, is it easier to be a Christian as a teenager or easier to be a Christian as an adult? And the point he was trying to make was his life was a lot harder than mine, was what he's trying to get across to me. And we talked about that in class for a good while. Is it easier to be a Christian teenager, or is it easier to be a Christian adult? And the answer I had was it depends what that teenager did. If you're an adult and you have had years upon years and upon years of habits formed and grown in a godly way, then really once you become an adult, it's a lot easier to be a Christian. But if you are, as a teenager, if you make poor decisions, it becomes a lot harder to be a Christian as an adult because then you have to make a lot of changes in life. A lot of repentance and a lot of habit-forming things going on there. For example, tonight, it was not difficult for me to make time to come to church. You know, it's Wednesday night. I pretty much knew I was coming, right? And you could say, well, duh, that's your job, right? And that's true. That's a big part of it. But also, I don't miss church. Unless I'm really, really sick and I got to call Corey Westerfield at 8:40 and say, hey, you got to preach today and make him panic, I'm going to be here. And so those are habits which are developed. You develop habits in the same way. When I walk through Walmart, they sell alcohol, sad thing, even in Walmart now. When I walk down that alcohol aisle, there is not a bit of temptation for me because I've developed a habit of not wanting or desiring alcohol. But some folks have not had that history of decisions, and it is a huge deal for them to be able to walk past that because of the decisions which they've made in the past. And so there, I think, is a little bit of an example of the importance of using discretion with the people who we choose as our friends because we recognize how much they're going to influence us. It was said by who's the guy that put Apple together? He died. Yeah, Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs used to say, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you better change rooms, right? Which his biography says he said that, but looking at his personality, he thought he was the smartest person on the earth, so I don't know why he would say that. But he'd always say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, if you're the most spiritual person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Because you need to have somebody that you can look up to. You need to have somebody who you can be accountable to who will help you to grow and help you to mature and help you to be better. So see that verse 11 there, that idea of discretion will preserve you is really, really strong. Now, we get to this next chapter, we start rolling through, this next slide, we start rolling through these a little bit more as we go along, as we finish up who we choose as friends. Chapter 13, look at verse 20. He who walks with wise men, that man's going to be wise. But the companion of fools will be destroyed. See, once again, where he's saying, who you spend your time with will determine who you are. All right? Your friends determine who you are. 14, Go from the presence of a foolish man when you do not perceive in him the lips of knowledge. When somebody around you starts saying really, really dumb stuff, you don't need to be there, do you? Something happened many years ago when I lived in Jackson, Mississippi. And Jackson looks different than Benton, racially, economically, in many, many different ways. We had a boy who was a teenager growing up. He had some family trouble, things such as that, so he ended up moving to live with his grandmother. He loved it because there were a lot fewer rules, okay? He was a good student in high school, mostly A's, a few B's, and he was 2 months away from graduating. Already had a scholarship to Jackson State, and so, he was going to do pretty well. Well, he was with his grandma, went out with some friends, and of course, they were listening to music, they were acting kind of thuggish, or whatever else you might say. Riding along, people were saying dumb stuff, or whatever else. The guy driving saw somebody he thought was after his girlfriend, circled the block, pulled out a gun, and shot that boy. Well, that made Justin, who was in the back seat on the passenger side, an accessory to murder. Well, politics aside, it was election season, and the DA was working to try to get himself elected pretty well in the county where they were. He did not look like everybody else in that county. Justin is still in prison, even though that was 8 years ago. He ended up getting 42 years for accessory of murder because he was in that other place. Now, that's an extreme, extreme thing which you see. It's different. The law system is different depending on who you are sometimes. You see why it mattered to him, the friends he chose, and who he was around? Now, hopefully the justice system in other parts of the country are a little bit better off. But still, even today, you get categorized by the people that you stay around. And so it's important, even when it's not popular, that you stay around the right people. All right, chapter 14, we looked at that one. Chapter 21, a man who wanders from the way of understanding will rest in the assembly of the dead. Okay, that's not where you want to go, is it? So stay in the system of understanding. Chapter 23, verse 17. I like this one, okay? Do not let your heart envy sinners. Be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day, for surely there is a hereafter, and your hope will not be cut off. Do not mix with the winebibbers or the gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard or the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe the man with rags. All right, we'll see that verse later when we get to the, the point talking about work ethic. But you run through there. Verse 17, do not let your heart envy sinners. We ever have trouble with that, maybe? Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long. When there are others living around us, never molested, though in the wrong, right? What's the chorus say? Remember, farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Do not let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous for the fear of the Lord. In other words, if it looks like somebody is cheating on a test to get an A, don't be jealous of them. You take care of yourself, and the Lord will take care of everybody else. If you see somebody who is doing something at work that's not right, don't be jealous of them, and surely don't imitate them. You take care of yourself, and the Lord will make those things to be right. Okay, any comment? Anything more to do? Okay. All right, next side of what we're going to look at is looking at the fellow man, your neighbor, and how you treat your neighbor. Now, I like this going through Proverbs because I think it teaches us something. It shows us something. A lot of times we think the Old Testament was all eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and there's not any love and consideration for the neighbor in the Old Testament. So we run through these passages. You're going to see a lot of quoting that Jesus did out of the book of Proverbs in the Sermon on the Mount. I think that's something pretty good to look at. Look at chapter 3, verse 27, okay? How you treat your neighbor. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it's in the power of your hand to do so. If you can help somebody, what's the writer saying? Take advantage of the opportunity to do it, right? If you can help somebody, help them. That's one of the beautiful things we see about this congregation here. It was really fascinating the other night when they were working on the Christmas project, seeing all those children, all the presents which were being prepared and taken care of for all those folks. It's really interesting seeing the way that this building is used as far as the kids first and after school. There's a lot of people who understand this passage. If you can do something good, if it is possible for you to help somebody, take advantage of that opportunity to help them. All right, look at verse 28. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back tomorrow, I'll give it when you have it with you. There we see, once again, parallel construction of Hebrew poetry. If you're able to help somebody, be sure to do it. Now skip down to chapter 11. Chapter 11, he who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his peace. Oh, the neighbors. Neighbors are always tough, aren't they? They don't mow their yard right, and they have stuff in the backyard, and they're always loud. All right, what's this passage saying do with your neighbors? Chew them out every time you get an opportunity? If it's possible to be at peace with them. Do everything you can to be at peace. Man of understanding, excuse me, will be at peace with each one. Look at chapter 16. A violent man entices his neighbor and leads him in a way that is not good. He winks his eye to devise perverse things, and he purses his lips and brings about evil. All right, two things we're going to see here. You see where a violent man is looking for a way to cause trouble. He's looking for a way to cause an issue here or there. Another thing you see here, and this is off the subject, but I'm a preacher, I tend to get off the subject. I'm one of those Acts 8:4 preachers, right? Goes everywhere preaching the word. One of the things you see here is the way that Hebrew language worked. Hebrew is not very good at abstract thoughts, okay? So, like, you could say, man, in our culture, we'd say, wow, I am in love with that girl, right? A Hebrew wouldn't say that. He would say, my heart hurts, something like that. A funny one that comes up in the New Testament that especially kids like when you're reading it in the New Testament from an older translation. You say, man, when you're around, I just feel butterflies in my stomach, okay? A little bit abstract. How does Paul say it? My bowels are twisted with compassion, all right? Now, you just walk up to a lady who you love and say, man, my bowels are twisted. That she will be very impressed, right? Okay? There's a little bit of a difference there in the language that comes across. Well, Hebrew works that way, and you see it really working here. You see, he winks his eye to devise perverse things. What's he doing? He's squinting, thinking, what can I do to really mess this guy up? What can I do to get him? You look at it, he purses his lips, and you can just imagine a guy putting his lips together because he's just trying to come up with just a perfect plan to make this person fail, to make this person fall, right? Maybe you remember sometime, maybe over the holidays, if you're with your grandkids or even with your family, you're playing checkers or chess or whatever else it may be, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, what move can I do where I can get a triple jump? Or what can I do to, get his queen or to get the king and finally be done with this game or whatever else it may be? A lot of wicked people are that way, and you got to be careful because even though they may seem friendly and even though they may seem kind to you, they're looking for a way to destroy. They're looking for a way to hurt you. All right, look at chapter 24, verses 8. He who plots to do evil, that person is going to be called a schemer, and the devising of foolishness is sin, and a scoffer is an abomination to men. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. All right, let's break that apart a little bit. He's called a schemer. You don't want to be called a schemer, right? You call a person a name, especially in the old days, that was pretty serious. In other words, that was his character there. And you got to be really careful about that being your character. The devising of foolishness is sin. The scoffer is an abomination. Only a few things are an abomination to the Lord, right? These are things that you just absolutely cannot stand to be around. You just don't like it at all, right? Jeremiah's not in here, so we can just say Duke, right? Just yuck. All right, multiply that times 100 million. That's what we're talking about. A club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. You think of somebody who's attacking you and going against you. Okay, now talking a little bit more about the neighbor. Let's go ahead and look through here. Chapter 25, okay? Do not go hastily to court, for what will you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame? Debate your case with your neighbor and do not disclose your secret to another. All right? I have a boy in my Boy Scout troop. I'm a scoutmaster. It's a lot of fun if we get to camp and such. He had somebody say something about his mama, okay? And so he decided he was going to punch the guy. The only problem is the guy was 1.5 feet taller than him. And while the guy wasn't stronger, the guy more or less just sat on him. It did not work well for him at all. He got suspended 3 days after getting sat upon by a fat dude. Now, I was talking to him, and I said, well, you defend your mama, but there's better ways to defend your mama, right? And he said, I should have noticed the size of that guy. He was thinking, I'm stronger than him. In fact, he'd even taken karate. Karate works great, but when size still matters, or it can matter if you're not really, really good at karate. Well, looking at the same thing, before you get into a fight, the number one question should not be, should I? But maybe the number one question is, can I, right? How is this going to end? Is it going to end well? Not very well. There are some people, pretty much 6.9 billion people on this earth, I will not get in a foot race with because I'm not going to win, right? Well, he's saying the same thing here with your neighbor. Before you get into a fight with a neighbor, look and see where this is going to end up. Look at the consequences and the means to the end of where you're headed. Now, yes, that matters if you're on a school bus talking to a really big guy and a bully, right? Matters even more in the church. Somebody in the church may just aggravate the fire out of me. They may actually sit in my pew, all right? Or they may take my parking spot. Okay, or I may feel wronged one way or the other. I don't mean to belittle anybody who feels wronged. But here is what I mean. When you confront them, what's the end going to be? Maybe they'll say, oh, sorry, and they'll get out of your pew. But if they don't, are you bringing discord to the church? And is it worth it for you to allow yourself to be wronged so that the church can have peace? Look at the end of every argument before you start the argument. There's sometimes where we're so busy defending our pride in something which if we would let it drop, we'd forget about in 10 minutes. But we get so caught up in defending our pride, we end up destroying something which really, really, really is important to us. And we end up going down a road we don't want to go down. Look at the end of where you're headed before you walk down that road, before you go in that direction. I think that's what he's talking about there in verses 8 and 9. Now look at verse 17. I like 17. All right, fish and people, they do what after 3 days? They stink, right? Okay, that's a little bit more of a Yiddish proverb. Maybe this is where it comes from. Verse 17, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you, all right? All right, you go over to somebody's house every day. First day, they're like, awesome, man, we can hang out and talk, right? Next day, they're like, yay. The third day, they're like, hey, all right? All right? And it gets worse and worse every day. I like verse 17. I think that's pretty good. You know, rarity is a good thing. All right. I just like that. I don't know why. Yes. Yes.
It reminds me of something my mom would tell me when I was growing up. She'd say, don't wear your welcome out.
Don't wear your welcome out. Yeah, that's true. That's the same thing, isn't it? Be sure not to wear your welcome out. Very true. Okay, as we keep going along here. Uh-oh, did I push my button? No, I didn't. I'm in the right place. Okay, verse 18. Okay, once again, you see this repetition. We just looked at this verse. A man who bears false witness against his neighbors like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Now look at chapter 26. And it says the same thing. Now look at verse 19. Confidence in an unfaithful man in the time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. All right? Brad, you probably could tell us about this, couldn't you? Brad just had knee surgery. All right? Have you ever had a broken foot and it takes you forever to get somewhere? And you're just aggravated because you're not able to stand on it. You just get tired of being sick, tired of hurting, and you're ready for it to be done. Any of y'all ever experienced that? Have you ever had a toothache and you want to eat, but if you eat, it's going to hit that tooth and you know it's going to hurt, and so you try to eat on the other side of your mouth, and then every once in a while you'll forget and it even hurts worse? That's the sort of thing he's talking about. It's just not worth it, and it just hurts. It's just very uncomfortable. That's what confidence in an unfaithful man, a person who you can't place your trust in, will lead you to. Pretty important there. Okay? And a man, this last one here, 29 verse 5, a man who flatters his friend is spreading a net for his feet, setting a trap for him. Okay? You ever notice at every church service, maybe I shouldn't tell you so you don't know the secret, every church service, if you come in within 5 minutes before church starts, you're going to have a guy standing with a sheet of paper around this door or around one of the side doors, right? And he's going to be holding, it's usually the back of the bulletin. If you're a guy and you walk by that person, what's going to happen? I'm glad you're here. You're leading prayer today, right? Okay? All right. Now, that's kind of a funny way of looking at it, but you got to avoid that guy if you don't want to do it. Now, hopefully you want to do it. But be very careful because people have a net out. When everybody likes you, be careful because there might be a reason everybody likes you. And so that's what he's saying there as far as the way in which you treat your neighbor. All right, let's look at this next one, this next section. Maybe our last section we'll look at tonight. The poor, okay? How do you deal with the poor? Now, we already looked at chapter 3, verse 28. That's once again repeated. But look at chapter 11. Verse 24, there is one who scatters, and yet he increases more. There's one who withholds more than is right, and it leads to poverty. Okay, we see a little bit of reflection of that over in the book of 1 Corinthians, or 2 Corinthians, chapter 8 and 9. Okay? To him who gives generously, God will give back more, right? To those who hold it, their wealth ends up hurting them greatly. I wanted to talk about that in Sunday's sermon, but I ran out of time. I know that's hard to believe. No amens. All right. In the book of James, James is talking to those who are rich. And what he says to them, it's very interesting. Your wealth has become corrosive. Imagine something which you're holding on very tight. You hold on it tight enough, long enough, it turns into acid and ends up burning you. And James says that's what happens to the riches of a wealthy man who is withholding from the poor. When you're not generous with your money, it ends up corroding your life and hurting you. And so it's important for us to use what we have to bless other people. It's important for us to recognize that money has a purpose. All right, verse 25. The generous soul shall be made rich. He who waters will also be watered himself. Okay? Once again, you see that repetition there. You water other people, they will water you back. That is how you obtain wealth, especially spiritual wealth, which is there. All right, now look at verse 26. The people curse him who withholds grain, but blessings will be on the head of him who sells it. In other words, going back all the way to the top, do not say to your neighbor, go and come back tomorrow, I'll give it to you. If you're able to help other people, what the writer of Proverbs is saying is you need to help them. You need to take the advantage that you can help them. Okay? Now, chapter 13, verse 23, this one's a little bit off the subject, but I stuck it here. Much food is in the fallow ground of the poor, but for a lack of justice, there is waste. Now, what's that mean? Fallow is kind of an interesting word there. Much food's in the fallow ground of the poor, but for a lack of justice, there is waste. Do we know what that means, or are we shy? It is the auditorium class. It's a scary place to talk. In our country, I think so. I think so. Yeah. Let me put it this way. Several years ago, I spent some time in Russia, a couple of weeks, almost a month, working on a mission trip. Russia is put together very, very differently than the U.S. What Stalin and Lenin did was he took all the peasants off the fields because you couldn't own land. And so every town is like 500,000 up to 3 million people. And they're just in high-rise apartments. And so you have all this land out here that's just fallow and left. Now, with Gorbachev and all that coming on, and even today, Russians can go out and buy some land of about 20 feet by 20 feet. And they will have their hoe and their shovel and their bucket, and they'll get on the bus, and they'll go out to their land, and they love radishes and beets. That's their favorite fruits out there, or vegetables, or whatever those are. Then they go out there and they grow it. But what's interesting about the way Russia works is it's the largest country in the world, and yet the people there have very little land. There's not a lot of justice which is going on there. You'll see a lot of times in life where when you see people starving, it's because the government or even they themselves are not using what they've been given in a good way, in a proper way. Russia should be the most well-fed country in the world because of all those steeps and all those plains that they have to grow things. They can put our Midwest and our Great Plains to shame because there's just so much. But it's never been used in a very wise way because of their centralized government, because of the control which they have, which is there. Now, what does Russia matter to us? In our life, in our economy, we have great opportunity. But a lot of times, we let that opportunity pass. And we don't take advantage of opportunities which are there. Now, we're talking about that in an economic standpoint. But is that true spiritually? How many people we have who have grown up in this building or over in Olive, down in our other building, who have heard preaching every Sunday and had some of the best Bible classes and had some of the best people to look up to and have had the greatest opportunity, and yet once they move out, they quit coming to church. They're not taking advantage of the opportunity they have to grow spiritually. And if you're not growing, you're shrinking. We don't plateau as a congregation, and we don't plateau as individual Christians, do we? You're either growing or shrinking. Don't let the opportunity pass in order to produce for God. I think that's something pretty important. All right, chapter 14, look at verse 20. The poor man is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich man has many friends, okay? Now, this is a contrasting one. Look at verse 21. He who despises his neighbor's sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he. Okay, you have a contrast here. But he's kind of talking about two different things. Why do people hate poor folks? You got to help them, right? Yeah, you're sitting there and you see somebody who's broken down, and you're like, man, I got to stop and help that person, right? I remember many years ago, the car I had broke down on the parkway. And I had 3 church members pass by and wave at me while I walked to Calvert City to get my car fixed. All right? Next Sunday, they're like, hey, we saw you walking down the parkway. I was like, yeah, thank you. All right? Why didn't they pick me up? Well, maybe they hate me, maybe not. I don't know. One of them said, oh, we thought you were exercising. I thought, sure. Yeah, I bet you did. All right. Well, those people who are poor, sometimes you don't want to talk to them too much, because it makes us uncomfortable. You ever meet somebody where you talk to them and say, hey, how you doing? And they tell you the truth? You stop asking how they're doing anymore, right? Well, that's kind of what he's talking about, okay? But the rich fella, why does he have so many friends? Everybody wants to be with him. Now, he contrasts that, talking a little bit about that 20 is to make you laugh, and then he's going to teach his lesson in 21, okay? If you despise your neighbor, you're in trouble. It's not good to have something and not give it to the person who needs it. That gets you in trouble. But he who has mercy on the poor, he's going to be happy and he's going to be fulfilled. All right, keeping along here, he who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. He's glad at calamity. He's not going to go unpunished. Let's look through here. 21. Tell me if you've ever heard this, maybe in the book of James. 21:13. Whoever shuts his ears to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be heard. He covets greedily all the day long, but the righteous gives and does not spare. You see that? All right. We're going to close here talking about the enemy. Okay? Look at chapter 20, verse 22. And in fact, many of these you're going to recall come out of Romans chapter 12. You'll run across that and think, Paul's quoting scripture. All right? Do not say, I will get even. Wait for the Lord, and the Lord's going to do what? Okay, he will make it even, won't he? All right? On to Romans 12 thought. We'll skip and we'll come back. Look at 25:21, okay? If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he's thirsty, give him water to drink. For in so doing, what's Paul say in Romans 12? You're going to put those heap of coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord will reward you. A lot of times when we spend so much time there saying, what do those coals of fire mean? Yes, Paul was talking about that, but Paul also was saying, remember, you've been taught this since the Old Testament. He's bringing up their Old Testament teaching all through Romans 12. It's really interesting when you run through Romans 12, see how much Old Testament is hanging out there as we go along. All right, let's finish with 24. Verse 17, do not rejoice when your enemy falls. Do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles, lest the Lord see it and it displease him, and he turns away his wrath from your enemy. Okay? So be careful to treat your enemy in a good, positive way. All right? Thanks for being here. Thanks for your participation, and we'll see you Sunday. Yes, sir. When they what? Did I think about the coals of fire? No. No, I was thinking I really should have put gas in my car. I've not run out of gas since, though.